I think what it shows is how far behind the conversation our national government is and our royal family, because the royal family have deep connections to slavery. The Royal African Company sent 180,000 Africans across the Atlantic, more than any institution in history. And yet they're not really exploring their history. Whereas aristocratic families like the Trevelyan's and Alex Renton's family and even the Harewood family are volunteering this stuff and talking about reparations. And that's where the international conversation is. That's what the Caribbean countries are talking about. It's a conversation in America. Germany has paid actual reparations, whereas we are still talking about whether empire was good or bad. And we want to talk about abolition, but not about the actual slavery that led to it.
Right, given that British Empire involved the enslavement of millions and the deaths of millions of others through famine, war and disease, it's no surprise that tempers can rise when the topic arises. Lots of conversations about British Empire involve at least one person getting very upset or shouting and another person getting very defensive. That is just one of the absolute truths included in Sathnam Sanghera's new book, Stolen History. It's written for kids, but we could all do with reading it. It's full of facts and fills in some of the massive gaps in our education about what happened during colonial rule and the long, long tail of it now. Sathnam, you're very welcome. Hello.
Oh, it's nice to be on the show.
What did you learn about the empire at school, if anything?
Almost nothing. There was nothing specifically about empire, but also when there was history which had an imperial element, like World War One, World War Two, empire wasn't mentioned. The millions of soldiers who fought from India and Africa in both world wars. It never occurred to any of our teachers to tell our racially diverse school that we were there too. But also with the Tudors, there were black people in Henry VIII's court. Elizabeth I was complaining about there being too many black people in London in the 1600s. And I think you could incorporate imperial history into so many of the core things we teach anyway.
You went to Cambridge University, didn't you? First class honours degree in English literature?
Yeah.
Yes. So even when you got there, did you notice the absence of reference to empire?
Totally. Well, actually, I didn't even realise it. I wasn't being taught it because I hadn't been taught it. But I didn't study a single brown author in my entire education until my final 2 terms at Cambridge University, which is quite damning given we are a multicultural society. And also, the reason we're a multicultural society is that we had a multicultural empire going back hundreds of years. And it's like empire ended and we just wanted to forget it even happened.
Is it possible for you to work out what a difference it would have made to your childhood, your adolescence and your young adult life if you had your background, your history, your heritage referenced within school?
I think you can work out what a difference it would make to us as a nation, because every 3 or 4 years there's a major crisis about racism in this country. The Stephen Lawrence murder or Windrush, and there's an official inquiry. And I've read some of these inquiries. They always say one of the things we need to do is teach the history of imperialism, because then we will realise we are a multicultural country because we had a multicultural empire, and then there'd be less chances of us being racist. But yet something stops us from doing that, and that imperial history still isn't taught particularly well. It's better than it was in my day and maybe your day, but it's still not a priority.
And do you think that a lot of that is possibly, if we were going to be sympathetic about it, a sense of shame and a desire to move on and do things better?
Yeah, I think when we look back at our history in Britain, we want to be comforted, whereas the Germans look at their history and they want to learn. And there are really difficult things about imperial history. But also I think the story of British Empire is also really complicated. People disagree about when it began, when it ended. Some people say it never even happened. It's much easier to talk about World War One, World War Two, and the Tudors, which are very clear and we know about, rather than getting into the really complicated stuff that is, the East India Company and slavery.
Yeah. So you asked this question, why do true facts about the British Empire inspire angry responses? It's one of the questions that you write in this fantastic book. Why do they? And the thing that I said at the beginning, which when I read it, I thought that is so true. So many conversations start in a benign sense about the empire and end up with a feeling that people have to take sides and find a kind of binary solution to that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's because feelings come into it very quickly. Feelings of pride and shame. A lot of people have connections to empire, either on the side of the colonised in my case, or the colonizers.
I think nearly everybody in this country, if they just dug a little deeper than the surface, would find some kind of connection, wouldn't
Yeah,
they?
God, I'm going around speaking to schools at the moment. I always ask kids, do you have a parent comes from abroad? And how I would say around 3/4 of the kids in London have some sort of family connection to empire. And it works on both sides, of course. And so very quickly people start getting angry. Also, when you talk about British Empire, you're talking about race. You're talking about white people conquering brown people and black people. And so immediately you're in one of the most toxic subjects on the planet, which is racism.
What's the best question you've been asked so far whilst doing your tour? Because you're taking the book round classrooms, aren't you?
Well, as you know, if you've spoken to kids, they ask you things like, which football team do you support?
How much money do you earn?
How much do you
Yeah,
earn?
that's the killer.
What do you say? I said many more times than my parents. And
I think what they really want, Sathnam, is an actual figure. I think you have to give the actual figure these days.
I might start to, yeah. I'm not going to tell you, though.
No, okay.
Oh.
fair
Just because it'd be embarrassing compared to how much you earn.
All right. Can I just ask? Did the publisher or did an agent come to you and say you need to write this book because there's a gap here, or did you go to them and say I would like to write a view of the British Empire that needs to be out there because, frankly, primary school kids and kids in the first year of secondary aren't being taught this stuff, and it's still the background to so many conflicts in the world, isn't it? So if you don't know this stuff, you've never been made aware of it, you're frankly you're at a loss. You can't understand what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. The situation in Nigeria, in Pakistan, in India, in Myanmar, it all goes back to empire. But no, the story with the book was that a publisher approached me and I said, I don't want to write for kid for books because I don't want to water down the violence, because violence was part of it. And then another publisher came and they said, you don't have to water down the violence. So I said yes.
So which is the most violent episode that you included,
I
even
think
though it's quite painful?
Slavery. I mean, transatlantic slavery. You cannot get over the abuses and the violence. And I think kids can handle it. Also, they need to know. I think you can't water it down. It's a bit like the Holocaust. You cannot water it down.
What do you think of Laura Trevelyan's recent donation of £100,000 to recognise the part that her family played in slavery? She worked for the BBC, but has since, I think she's just left the BBC, hasn't she, to actually pursue this kind of path of reparation as a job.
Yeah, I think what it shows is how far behind the conversation our national government is and our royal family, because the royal family have deep connections to slavery. The Royal African Company sent 180,000 Africans across the Atlantic, more than any institution in history. And yet they're not really exploring their history. Whereas aristocratic families like the Trevelyan's and Alex Renton's family and even the Harewood family are volunteering this stuff and talking about reparations. And that's where the international conversation is. That's what the Caribbean countries are talking about. It's a conversation in America. Germany has paid actual reparations, whereas we are still talking about whether empire was good or bad. And we want to talk about abolition, but not about the actual slavery that led to abolition.
And do you think that there will ever come a time when a government does more openly address the issue and actually put forward money?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. And it's going to be the conversation in the next 20 years. It's amazing during the coronation to see the royal family go from, we don't want to talk about this, we're not even going to use the Koh-i-Noor diamond because we don't want to raise the issue, to King Charles saying, actually, I'm going to commission research and we need to apologise. And, you know, the conversation moved on in just a few months. And I think the pressure is going to be relentless from abroad, but also from a new generation of people who really care about this.